Hey, what's going on, everybody? Robert Marzullo here, Ram Studio Comics, and I just wanted to go ahead and show you how I use Sketchbook Pro to perform my storyboard work. So I've got a frame lined up here. It's a 9 by 16 scale, anyways. I work at about 300 DPI, and I just start going to town and rough sketching kind of the concept. I'll be working from a script, obviously, and they may say, have a you know, mid 20s female in a coffee setting, like a cafe, whatever. And, they'll give me some description on what they like. And then I just start roughing it out. Now, these can be referred to as thumbnails, or, in storyboarding, we just call them roughs. But it's a very necessary and integral part of creating these, because I think far too many people go right into trying to do finished art, and you can get a lot of work done and a lot of information put down in your roughs, and it lends to the end result regardless. So if you notice here, I'm just using the pencil tool. It's the regular settings that come right out of Sketchbook. It's a fantastic setup the way it is already out of the box. And I'm just really kind of feeling out the form. As you notice, I'm using some of the box and cone methods you see in comic book illustration and things like that. I haven't used the perspective tools, but I'm pretty good at drawing out the perspective first in my rough stage, like so, and then using Sketchbook Pro's very awesome perspective tools to refine it. So, and to move this canvas around, just hold space bar. And right here, I'm trying to get my perspective points lined up. So you just hit that perspective grid up top. At a 1 point perspective, it gives you that single vanishing point. And obviously the automatic cursor there that aligns to it, which is fantastic. And, so I just start drawing out some of the lines. I get them to line up. And then I realize, I'm probably going to need a 2 point perspective. So I go to the 2 point, realign my points once again. And it's a really quick way to do it. It takes a couple little swipes to get them right in the right place. But then after that, you're good to go. They stay stationary for as long as you need them. They affect each layer, which I think is smart. And it's a really quick and fun and easy way to do perspective. So it's actually one of the biggest selling points for me using this software, because I have to draw perspective in storyboards quite often. So if there's a tough kitchen scene or something like that, you definitely want perspective tools. If you're just drawing characters, then don't get me wrong, it's still an amazing program for just character creation. But you don't necessarily have to have the perspective tools for that. But I prefer them. They help with almost everything, and even characters. In turn, you can still draw in a good perspective scenario and get a better character rendition. If you look at her elbows on the table, they follow the perspective line. So little things like that. So now I'm using a soft erase method that I do. I just take the soft airbrush or erase brush and soft erase it all down, kind of like if I was working traditionally on paper. And then I begin to draw over top and refine my lines a little bit more. It just allows me to keep feeling out the process. And you can do that as many times as you need. I oftentimes do it 3, maybe 4. If I'm really trying to do a finished piece of art, maybe even more. But for storyboarding, the name of the game is speed. So you got to remind yourself not to get lost in the complexity of what you could create, and get down the essential information and refine it to a level that's in respects to what your time frame is. So it's very much a deadline oriented time frame type deal. I'd love to spend days and days on every project, but it's just not conducive to this type of work. Sometimes it is, and they're called comps, and they're a little bit, they allow more time, and they want the more refined work because they might end up in print media and large advertising type campaigns like that. But for the majority of what I do, it's quick turnaround for, advertising and commercial needs. So as you see, I just keep roughing that out. I used obviously the ellipse tool a minute ago to try to get the top of the cup. Another thing that is really useful in this program is all those ellipse tools and the French curves. Uh, I suggest that if you do use this program to really delve into that and use those, because they're really handy. I find myself using those more and more. For the most part, I try to do as much as I can freehand. Not that there's any one right way to do this. There's obviously a lot of opportunities to use reference and all that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I try to do as much freehand for my own sake and to strengthen my abilities to draw from the mind. But if I run into a pinch, I definitely pull from reference. So don't feel bad doing that. It's actually highly recommended for any kind of commercial and art production. So you see there, I just grabbed the laptop lines and moved those over a bit. It looked like it was floating off the table a bit. And the reason why I drew the perspective lines out to a vanishing point like I did is I'll end up using the perspective tool to refine the line work of the laptop there. So you see I just keep moving those lines around, erasing, refilling. It's much like just working traditionally, but the beauty of it is you don't end up with a messy piece of paper when you're done. You can do this as much as you need, as often as you need, and it's still nice and clean. Now here I separated that and put it on a new layer. Control C, Control V, or I'm on a Mac, so it's Command C, Command V, or Command X, I'm sorry, Command V. And the reason I do that is it gives me a little more flexibility. Like there I'm using the transform tool, and I can now manipulate it outside of the other layer, and you can literally dissect your artwork. Like you'll see right here, I'm going to take the bottom part, do the same thing, use the transform tool again, and so I can literally dissect the artwork and edit in a number of ways to get the lines just where I want. And and you may say, well, Rob, why don't you just erase and redraw? Sometimes it's more time conservative to just edit the lines that you have. And you'll find this out when you do something that's high, deadline. Like you got to pump out 3 of these frames in an hour for a meeting or something or whatever. Then you're gonna find these workarounds that And I'm not saying that's going to work for every artist. Each artist is going to be having individual needs. But this program will suit those needs because it ultimately runs really quickly, and that's another big selling point for me. I might have to run this on a tablet. I might have to run this on my phone. I need something quick and doesn't lag, and this software definitely does it. I mean, this file here is a pretty large file, and it runs flawlessly. There's no lag as I'm doing this, so which is extremely important when it comes to deadlines. So if you're a comic book illustrator or aspiring storyboard artist or storyboard artist, you got to know that your equipment will not slow down as you're trying to produce this. Plus, the other thing that it does is if it slows down as you're producing, it pulls you out of your mental focus to create good artwork. You have to be able to stay inside the realm of your imagination and create this stuff. Oftentimes, the phone rings or, somebody interrupts you and you got to kind of find yourself again where you were at and what you were thinking as you were creating. So, that's where this program being so fluid makes a great deal of a difference. And that's just, one of the things that I believe as I use it. So you see here, I'm just still using that pencil tool. I pretty much use that predominantly for, majority of the art that I do here. I'll go back and forth. Once I get to color and stuff like that, I'll use a few other, tools like the airbrush, smudge tools, different things. But for all my sketching and drawing, I use the pencil tool 90% of the time, and then I use the hard pencil tool to either ink or bring out some nice, defined hard edge lines at the end of the sketch. Now keep in mind, when I storyboard this type of work, I keep the refinement relatively low. because of the nature of what it is, and the idea is to just draw attention to the aspects that are important, the selling points of this piece. Like for instance, this script may read, have a woman in her mid 20s at a coffee shop doing some work on her laptop, facing camera, have some background elements that let you know we're in a coffee shop or a cafe. And that's all you might get. And then you got to scribble it out, and then they may make some revisions to the roughs, and you got to refine those, and they make some revisions to the pencils. And then once it goes to color, you're generally in the clear. And that's just the particular boards I do. Not to say that's, I'm sure boards for movies are different. Boards, I believe those are called shooting boards, and boards for, campaigns and various things are all going to be a little bit different. So that's how this is done. So I generally keep it pretty rough because, at all stages it could be altered for one. And you'll see here, I want that to go on the window, but I draw it and then mirror the layer because I can't write the word cafe backwards for some reason. But yeah, so you'll draw the stuff and you want to keep it, again, fluid and be open to change because that's going to happen. And sometimes it's as little as, hey, give her a coffee cup that's got a handle on it, or put a sleeve on it, change her hair color, make her heavier, thinner, whatever. So you just have to be ready to alter that work at any time. And as far as the level of finish, unless it's a comp, it's going to be relatively sketchy, and the name of the game is speed. So, that's where a process like this kind of lends itself. If you notice, I'm bouncing around and I'm actually applying a little bit of detail to each area versus staying in one given spot too long. If I did stay in any given spot longer, it would be the area of the selling point, which would be the female here. And I would almost say that the element of her and that front table that she's at, that would all be predominant information, with her being the focus. So that's where I would spend all the time illustrating. Now, if the idea of this is just a segue to another shot, which, most of the time it's going to be, very rarely, if ever, going to draw just one frame like I'm doing here. But then, you also have to take into account how long it's going to take you to get to each one of those shots, and again, what the deadline is. So now you see I toned down the layer, and I'm actually working over top of another layer now to refine the work a little bit more. And, here I can get in with a little more confidence now, and worry about, I guess at this stage, I'm worrying more about line clarity and a little bit more line weight as I put that down. It's still kind of rough, I'm still not considering this kind of some finished piece, but I just have a little bit more to work with having that underlying structure down, and I can start trying to fix her face because, the things I'm already seeing is that her lips are too big, one eye is higher than the other, the nose and the mouth is too far over. Actually, all of it's too far over for the angle of the face I want. So here a method I use is just select and grab and move, and it's so quick to do inside this program that one of the things that they did that was really well is it snaps back to the original tool you're working with. So you move something, you X out of it, you're right back to your pencil tool. And, there's some programs where you have to actually click onto the other tool, click off, click on, and all those little clicks, they add up, so that's one of the neat things about this. They were smart enough to design this where, it snaps right back to the tool you were needing. So, here I'm trying to refine some of the facial features, and, sometimes I can struggle with getting the face just right. So I keep picking at it and moving parts around and soft erasing and redrawing, and just trying to get the face to, it doesn't have to look 100%. It doesn't have to look like some supermodel, but she also shouldn't look, distracting or awkward. And at this stage, she still does, so I try to keep fixing that. And, just keep in mind, to be able to draw stuff like this as far as from the mind and get it relatively in the ballpark. Just study your figure drawing, your character drawing, draw from life, then imagine the same thing without the life drawing and draw it in your imagination. You'll eventually get it. It's something that you get more and more as you produce this stuff, and it becomes more and more easier and natural to produce. So, and I love how you can just hold the space bar, and then if you don't know that already, hold space bar and you can move the canvas around, rotate all with that icon that pops up. So they're just trying to feel out the textures and get a little bit of wrinkles in the clothing, and try to, define the shapes from one another. Just, all right, this area needs to be the fingers, give it a little more expression. Um, draw the clothing and put a few more wrinkles and folds in there to, so you're real apparent of what's going on in the line work. And just filling in a little more of the perspective lines and figuring out these shapes a bit more. And of course, got to have a little steam over the coffee. Now we know that the liquid she's drinking is in fact hot. We didn't know that a moment ago. And that's what's funny too about storyboarding. You see, I'm just moving the face down because I realized her forehead was way too short. And then I'm selecting, deleting some of my line work so I could see my art a little bit better. But that's the funny thing about storyboards. A lot of times it's all these tiny little details in the work that they're looking for. For instance, you could submit something like this and they'll say, hey, we needed her to be a married woman. There should be a ring on that left hand. So all these little details that really say volumes. You kind of take it for granted when you illustrate this stuff, especially when it's just something that you want to draw. You forget to put a lot of tiny little details in there that actually say a lot about the drawing without there being any words. So it's important to pay attention to that. So just sketching away, now I'm working on the little notepad that's on the desk, and you can see with all those base lines there, I can just freehand this and still get, something in the neighborhood of what I need. I'll probably go back and do a little bit more perspective drawing, but I think for the most part, I freehand from this stage on because it's easy enough to do once you've established those guidelines with the perspective tools, and then you can just, kind of, have fun with it and illustrate and not worry too much. And it's funny using this program. I actually forget sometimes that I'm not drawing on paper. I've literally reached for an eraser and stuff like that. So and that's a good thing. I mean, it's that convincing when you utilize it that it feels so natural that you forget that you are on a computer. And I think here I used the ruler tool. No, not yet. And you see, I just keep nipping and tucking at all the lines. I oftentimes feel like I'm molding a piece of clay or something. Like I'm always adjusting and moving things around. And then if you notice, I zoom in and zoom back. Yeah, and here I'm using the perspective lines again. Love that feature. And you see how quick and easy that is. I mean, there's no struggle there. You don't see me, that's probably the only thing. You got to make sure you pull in the direction of the vanishing point, obviously, or it'll snap to the wrong line, especially when you're closer to the horizontal mark. But other than that, I mean, fantastic. I mean, and take it from me, somebody that doesn't like drawing in perspective. I actually just like doing characters, but I don't have a choice. I have to draw what I'm told. So, that, and I enjoy it now, especially with these new tools, but it made it so much more easily digestible for me to do it now than it ever was before. And I love how that you can pull them way off the screen there and set them wherever you need. It feels just like you're doing that on your drafting table or something. It's pretty cool. So you see, I keep playing around because I pretty much drew my laptop in the wrong perspective. So I'm trying to get it just right, but the vanishing points are telling me, no man, actually messed up and it's not in the correct perspective. So one of the things from just trying to eyeball it. Oh, and just so you know, here I was trying to erase a couple times and it wasn't working. Why? I was still on my perspective ruler, so the eraser was snapping to the perspective ruler. So you gotta watch out. Sometimes it will correct you from just being a big dummy like I am sometimes. So getting those just in the right place, and which is funny. Sometimes you get hung up on such a little detail, trying to get it just right, but it's worth it. Every time you think you're struggling at something, then you start to figure it out. It's definitely worth that effort. And here's the ruler tool. I absolutely love this because you can just set it point to point, pull your line, much like the French curves and the oval and all that, or ellipse tool. And just fantastic. I just, I don't know. I can't say enough about this one. Something about this just works really well. You just move those endpoints, you move your center line to reposition it, and bam, you're off and running. So it's a really neat feature. I find myself using that a lot as well. And there's my little 5-minute laptop or whatever that took to do. And this is sped up just a little bit. I don't draw absolutely this fast, but it's not sped up entirely too much. I wanted you guys to be able to see obviously exactly what I'm doing here and not get lost in the time lapse. And also to be able to have time to explain, what I'm doing here. So they're just doing some little decorations or ornaments on the table. Not really sure you'd call it ornaments, but hopefully you know what I mean there. And now I'm just adding a little bit more heavy line work, drawing attention to certain elements. Again, that's real important with storyboarding because that's ultimately what you're doing is selling, things. It's advertising, and obviously this would be some kind of. This isn't a real board of anything or frame, but if it was, it would be a coffee, maybe a coffee commercial or advertisement or a chain of cafes or whatever. And just add some little, you know, details in the background just to kind of sell the scene. And you notice under the frame there, I added some lines. What that's for, in case you're wondering, is just to add notes. And this one, I don't add any notes because I'm not going back and forth with the director or anything like that. But a lot of times with frames, you have notes all over the place, and you keep the artwork obviously inside the frame, and then you put your notes all the way around, and then you can just crop just the area you need to send to your producer, director, whoever you're working with. But I wanted to show you, the real template of what I use to produce this stuff. And here I'm just adding a little bit of shading. I don't do a lot of cross hatching like I would do in comics, but I do just a lot of linear lines, and I do that just to show myself direction to the next stage. Now, generally, I would probably ink these a little bit depending on what they're for, but this is kind of more what I would do for speed boards. Not quite as loose as I would do, shooting boards, which I don't do much of, but as loose as I would do for typical, boards where the client might need 10 in a day or 20 over a weekend or whatever. So you have to, again, time is the issue. But here I would just, keep it loose and get all the line work ready to show me where I need to shade in my color mode, or sometimes we do gray tones first and then they go to color. So that's what the shading would represent here, and again, I wouldn't probably ink something like this most of the times, but if they are very refined boards, then, I would take this line work and tone it down once again and go back with the hard pencil tool and do a bit of inking. Even though it is a hard pencil tool, it actually reacts really well as a inking brush. So I'm getting most of the detail down. Again, when you see me pan back like that, it's me just trying to look at the artwork in a objective manner. Sometimes I'll even flip the artwork, which I probably should have done here because I'm seeing flaws in the face, definitely in the mouth here. That's what I'm going to get in here and, again, soft erase this down and try to clean this up a bit and see what oftentimes I look at this stuff and I don't know what's wrong about it. I just know something's wrong and I just keep playing with it. If I just can't get it at all, that's when I'll pull from reference. And keep in mind, you don't always have to, pay for stock photos or whatever. It's obviously nothing wrong with that. It's nice to do that, but take your own photos too. You should be able to eventually get to a point where you can rework faces and change them into new faces. So use family members, friends. It's a fun way to do it, and it teaches you a lot about reverse engineering your work, so to speak. So. And it's got stubby fingers, so I'm going to throw some little fingernails on here. And I realize that finger's tucked back, so it doesn't need a fingernail at the end of the knuckle. That would be kind of weird. And then I realized that this hand should actually have fingers coming through and around the cup. So it's like little things like that. I honestly, up until this stage of the drawing, didn't even see that. I don't know why. I guess I was focused on other areas. So once you get other areas of the drawing corrected, you start to see other areas that need to be corrected, and that's kind of how I progress through my work. So you see now I can go back through and clean it up a little bit more. And the hand's a little wonky. It could be a bit better for sure, but again, I'm kind of trying to deliver, in this production, I'm trying to show you the level of finish that I would typically draw. I don't want to over render it and then I'm showing you something that I don't do on a day-to-day basis. I want to show you something that's more accurate to what I do. And keep in mind too, at storyboarding, there are a variety of styles. There are some styles where they want it to look a lot more like a photo, and you have to spend more time digitally painting and getting the rendition to look more accurate to a photo type. I wouldn't say as accurate as a photo because it still has a very painterly look. But sometimes they want those types of samples or frames. Other times they want your style, and that's what this is. This is my style creating a frame. So it really just depends on what the production is and what they want. So keep in mind, as a storyboard artist, if you're aspiring to be one, that you'll want to practice different styles because it will actually help you sell a variety of jobs. And this program will do it all. You can do the line work version in color format that I'm going to show you here. And you can also do a nice painterly style. It's got all the tools in the toolbox to do whatever you need. And doing it very quickly, which is, again, my biggest appreciation of this program. So here I've got the hard pencil like I told you about, and I'm going through and adding a little bit more line weight. And what I tend to do with storyboards anyways, and I guess comics too, but mainly storyboards, is I make sure to show the most area of attention to the woman at this in this frame. So I'm start with her obviously, and then I try to draw attention to her by adding the deeper blacks and line weight. Even at the point when I get to color, I'll tend to add more vivid color to her, than the background. And I'll probably show you both ways by the end of the video. But the reason being is that she's already centered, so your eye's going to go to her naturally, and she should actually be a little bit more to the right, to use the rule of thirds or whatever. But your eye's going to go to her naturally, but then with the heavier line weight, it's definitely going to go to her, and it's actually going to stay at her for a longer period of time. And the same thing with the more vivid colors. All that does that so that, when you give this to somebody, and that's the purpose of the frame, they're going to respect what you did there. They're going to look at it and go, oh, yeah, that's correct. Even if maybe the art's not excellent, or, maybe you missed something in the background, there's certain elements that take precedence in the selling point and the storytelling of something like this. So if you get those right, then maybe the others can slide. And I'm not telling you to, not do everything correct, but there's certain things that take precedence. So now I use the Copic library to draw in some color. Now the way I like to color in this program, if you notice, it blocks out the line, and I quickly select multiply. And I love doing that. It's a great feature because it allows me to paint, right through the line work really fast. And I know her base color is way too dark right here. And that's another great thing about the Copics. You get to see the corresponding colors next to them. You also get to see the complementary color below, and you get to grab the colors and drag them down to a palette so that you can keep them for reference. All those things make for a really quick workflow for coloring. And you see I grab that little bit lighter color. I start to define some of the planes of the face and the neck and that. It's not light enough, but I'm slowly working up the form by doing that. Then I'll grab an even lighter one, and I'll switch to the airbrush here and then blend that in. And by the way, the airbrush, if you haven't already used it, works phenomenally. It's really smooth and blends really nice right out of the box. So there I grab a little bit of the darker kind of burnt umber color with that Tuscan orange, and get a little bit more of those deeper skin tone shadows. And oftentimes I struggle with color. I need to get a lot of the color placed in, so I'll make some pretty hideous mistakes with my color. So that's why I actually end up using a few layers so that I have full ability to go back and re-edit what I'm doing. And I love doing this effect where you drop the color in, you set it to multiply obviously, and then you lock transparency, and you can color without going outside of that flat or that particular layer. And really great way to color, really quick. Once again, I mean, this doesn't even sped up that much, and you'll see how I'm able to color this whole thing relatively quickly. And again, I'm not the greatest colorist, so for me to be able to do it relatively quickly, that's saying tons, because I don't know, I do better with black and white, but I'll do my best here to make the colors pop and work. So I just kind of play around with it, and I go back and forth. So there you see I'm adding some texture, with the airbrush really sized down, but that's something you can actually do with the pencil tool or, whatever tool. Then I grab a little bit lighter yellow. It needs to be even lighter than that, closer to a whitish yellow, but I start painting in some of the little highlights there. And keep in mind, if you don't want all the scribbly scratchiness that I got going on there, you can just start soft erasing your lines at this point. I kind of wait till I get a lot of the color in to do that, but it's just another way to do it. And there I'm using a selection shape and defining kind of an area that I want to just highlight. You can do that with a layer too. I just like using my selection tools every now and then. I'm trying to get that highlight just right, and then I think I scratch it and just go with, yeah, I end up darkening it. Because really, that would probably be more accurate that the highlights are to the left of the character here. And then the smudge tools, which I absolutely adore. You can just grab those and smudge your colors around a little bit if you feel you've got too hard of an edge on something. So those are really really fun to use. And those are what you would use for a more digital painted look, by the way. So here I'm just trying to find a good color for the clothing, for the blouse she's wearing. And just start painting away. Yeah, and this way is a really neat way to color. It's actually more the way I would color for comics, but it works so well that I use it for storyboards. Um, I pretty much do all my coloring this way now. Even if I digitally paint, I start this way, and then I just break off into more paint work. But it's a really neat way to work, and you can do this with values too. But I like doing it with just solid color here. And one of the things I try to remember not to do too much of is zooming in. I do it out of force of habit, but if you, again, are trying to move quickly through a production, hold yourself back from zooming in. Zooming in is actually a huge, probably drawback of working digitally. It's both. It's a double-edged sword because it's it's great to be able to zoom in and get these beautiful details in your work and refine it. But you can oftentimes find yourself zooming in too far and spending absorbent amounts of time into a detail that's not going to get looked at. So, unless you're just doing it because you're trying to refine your abilities or it's something that you're going to print really large on the side of your wall, yeah, you just got to really be aware of that. And again, in this type of work, you really got to be aware of that because there's really no point. So there, using the soft airbrush, again, it does beautifully. You don't even have to blend it. You can just simply paint it in, and then I'll grab the hard pencil tool and do the little bounce light or the edge lighting, rim lighting, I believe it's referred to as. Sorry. So just kind of dance that in there, little bits here and there, and I almost end up making her shirt look a little too speckly, shiny or whatever. But again, it's kind of a ploy because I'm trying to draw attention to her. So I end up doing things like that. I actually purposely added little highlights on the character at the end for that same reason. So they're just kind of flattening the skin tone again, moving around and getting the bulk of the solids in there. Real easy to do, real quick. And you can also use selection tools and define your shape and just paint it in real fast. This is just the way I do it. So try both methods because I've seen some people that for some reason move really fast with either A, creating a selection and doing it, or B, painting outside the lines and erasing. Some people seem to work faster that way. This is just the way that I use. So always remember that as an artist, when you're watching stuff like this, that this should just kind of open the door to other ways that you might implement into your own, stream of doing things, but always experiment and try new things because you could take this and then totally change it into something 10 times better than what I'm doing here. So don't just mimic everything I do. Simply use it as a guide to try your own ideas. So a little bit of blue for the eyes, multiply. And I've got the colors looking a little too vivid, too saturated here. Oftentimes I'll draw and color overly saturated, and then I'll lighten the saturation. I'll even save elements as final layers. Like I'll condense everything down in her layer as one layer, and then everything in the background is another layer, and maybe the table and items on the table is yet a third layer. And then I'll play with the saturations individually to, get the certain elements to pop more or less. So keep that in mind that I just work overly saturated. It's kind of how I draw or how I color, I guess. And a really neat thing about those Copics is that you can just grab another color right next to it and they work really well together. It's just kind of laid out for you. It's almost like the Dummy's Guide to Coloring, which I absolutely love. And the other thing is that you can grab the color puck to the left there that's got the pink color now, now the teal, but you can grab that and just you'll see me slide up or down with it. And when I slide down, I click, hold, slide down, I get a darker version of the same color. If I click, hold, slide up, I get a lighter version of that same color. If I click, hold, and go left or right, I get a more saturated, unsaturated version of that color. Huge time saver. Again, can't stress that enough. It is a huge time saver. And especially for someone like me that does not particularly see color well or work well with colors. So really neat feature. And you see I'm just kind of painting in little highlights on the jeans there and get a little bit more of the darks to round out the form. Then I use a smudge brush there to fix how I overcolored because I did all that on the same layer. And you see I just keep adding layers and drawing it in, but then I just merge them down afterwards. So, it just helps me flow through the artwork a bit faster. And I'm all about giving myself an easy out. If I got to go back and fix something, those layers protect me and allow me to re-edit. But once I feel confident that and see I forgot to lock the transparency there and it drew into her hand. So you got to remember to lock transparency after you flatten the colors. But it allows me to go back and then once I feel confident that, I've gotten what I'm after, I'll just merge them down. Which again on a Mac is Command E and on a PC would be Control E. And once I get the all the artwork filled in for the female here, the hero it's called in Storyboards. Once the hero is done, I'll actually be a little bit more loose on some of the other elements. Generally, I'll use a soft brush and just paint in the background, which I think I'll do here. So, because again, the focus is on the character of the hero, and the background can be a little bit more dreamy or something. I don't want to say unpolished, but it's more or less what it is. So it's something else to keep in mind when doing this type of work, that you can spend majority of your time on the main elements that are the focal point, and elements like the background, which are secondary or third, can be, less detailed. And you can still generally get a pretty decent effect doing it this way. In fact, you can actually soft airbrush all these colors in, tighten down the soft airbrush again, blend over some new layers, tighten it down to a hard pencil, go over it with some new layers, and you can actually refine your work. I mean, that's how I digitally paint. So you can keep doing that so you get a nice refinement. But, again, for the umpteenth time, this is all in regards to speed. And you'll know once you do your first job, when somebody asks you to do 20 frames, with a lot of elements in those frames in a couple days, you'll realize how fast you really have to produce this stuff to make that happen. It feels like you're trying to draw a full-length comic book in about a week, and it can be tough. But it teaches you a ton. It teaches you, obviously some shortcuts, and then some ways to get things done faster. Um, and then when you put them all together and you stand back, you're kind of in amazement because it actually still tells a really good story, and that's the purpose of it. So again here, just filling in some color, doing this a bit more solid because it needs to be a bit darker. I want to show, show some different color textures or color tones to the various elements in the scene. Now another great feature and quick way to work once you get to this stage and you've got a lot of tones put down and a good variety of things going on in the scene is just hold your Alt key. It gives you the eyedropper tool and select the various colors that are already in the scene. So I use that in conjunction with the color puck to adjust those colors up or down. And once I've got a good assortment of colors, I could almost just close off the Copic library at that point. But I leave it open just because it's pretty to look at and gives me ideas. But it is a really neat way to just color once you get so much down. And you can do that with values too. So once you get a lot of values down in your design or your painting, just start using the Alt feature and select the different values that are already there and see how much you can bring out with those. And one thing that saves you from doing is actually adding too many colors in the scene and getting something that's distracting, which is very easy for me to do. So painting the floor there, I wanted just a little bit lighter version. It's almost too similar to the wall, but I almost picture that it's a little bit lighter and it's reflecting some of the color from the wall. So again, just using that Alt key, filling in some little bits I still need to apply some color to just to make them more defined. And adding some more highlights on the glass to try to bring that out. And this is all I really do. At this point, I'm nipping and tucking and adjusting. There's no right or wrong way at this stage to do it. Obviously you can do something that looks nicer and that's going to look more correct, but there's a lot to be said for just experimenting and throwing something in and then going, yep, that doesn't work, let me try it another way. And that's pretty much what I do here. And the Copic library is great for finding a certain tone that you otherwise might have to search for with the the color puck. It gives you a really nice assortment of just like I was grabbing a tone for the laptop and it was too much of a brown gray, and then I was thinking in my head I need a nice blue gray that would look like a kind of a stainless steel type metal, or something in that realm, and it's all right there, under those grays. So it's a really neat little coloring tool. And just playing around with the puck there to get the right. I wanted just a basic gray for the stuff on the table there. Little white highlights. And then as I start getting towards the end of this, I start to take and add a little bit more of just white highlights. Like I said, I do that as a way to draw attention to certain elements. I'll do that to the character, obviously the glint of the eyes and things like that. But that's kind of my way to, finalize the artwork and give it a little bit more to look at. So I just get in there and, you know, little specks of white, you know, and and I kind of overdo it. You'll see I put it like on the hair and the shirt and stuff like that. But to me, I feel like I'm drawing attention to the main elements by doing that. And then I'll just get in there with the larger brush and do some shadows. And now I'm doing the highlights to the steam off the coffee mug or coffee cup, whatever she's holding there. And now I'll take the pencil lines like I spoke about before, and I'll soft erase some of these lines down. Just basically to clean stuff up. I'll soft erase them around the face because too many rough lines under her neck and on her face are going to make her look more unattractive, and it's just best to clean the artwork up a bit. Not all the way. I don't like to erase all of those sketch lines because I feel that it adds a little bit more of a hand-drawn feel. So I leave a little, a good amount of them in. But yeah, just under the neck, on her face, areas like that just, there shouldn't be as much of that there. And I'm moving those layers around because I'm trying to get that. I want to do a little bit of a white glow and get that just right. But in the wrong order, it'll actually wash away some of the details. So I tone it down and erase some of it down from the character. So yeah, just here it's just, me editing. Basically, like I said, I'll take the background and I'll tone it down a bit. I end up making it a little bit more solid by duplicating the layer. But I'll just kind of play around with that. And here I'm adding a little bit of the glints and the highlights I spoke about. But at this stage, it's just finding the right balance from contrast to glare and, things like that. And this ultimately is how I use Sketchbook Pro to create my storyboards. So, obviously there's, again, no one right or wrong way to do it, but this is the way that I use for my production, and seems to work well for me, and I enjoy it. So hopefully this video has been helpful for you and given you some insight into, the way that I use the program, and hopefully it'll give you some ideas of how you can use it yourself to create some really nice artwork. So now just jump on in and really explore this program, and remember that this is just the tip of the iceberg for what this can do. I'm still learning myself. There's still a long ways to go to really realize all the potential of what you can create in here. That, along with you just getting better with the more time you put in, it's pretty exciting. So, just remember to have fun with it and keep growing as an artist, and this program will definitely allow you to do that. So I thank you for watching, and as always, this is Robert Marzullo signing out. Keep drawing, keep having fun. We'll talk to you soon.